I love that idea of the sacred as a verb, and I think it kind of resonates with some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about as well. And I'm looking at a particular work, one specific artwork by the Vancouver-based artist Susan Stewart. But I'm going to begin this paper by way of a segue. For the last almost 3 years, I've been living and working in Banff, Alberta, Canada, which, for those of you that may not know, is a resort town in the Rocky Mountains in the midst of a national park. It's without question an extraordinary place to live, not because I'm excited about snow sports or mountain climbing or backcountry camping, but what I do respond to and try to connect with every day is an intangible but palpable power of the land, which can be felt in a profound way. I work at the Banff Centre, which is a post-secondary institution that provides facilitated residency opportunities for artists. I gave a paper at a conference late last year that talked about how the land is a protagonist in the work that artists produce when they're in residence. That paper discussed how the experience of living and working in a national park attunes you to the energy of the land and to the energy of the land transforming itself in accordance with the changes that we're imposing on it, and how we, my colleagues and I, are living in the midst of these changes, witnessing and experiencing the melting of glaciers, the increasingly ferocious forest fires, the floods, and so on, which I interpret as the Earth's response to the impact that we're having on it. I'm not the only one that feels this palpable and spiritually enlivening power of the land. It's something that First Nations people of the region have known for millennia, and many sites around Banff and the National Park are considered sites of ceremony, vision quest, and healing. And this is actually Sulphur Mountain. This is the view outside of my office window. And it's, yeah. Yep, I literally put my phone up to the window and took a picture. So yes, and it's considered a site of healing. It's full of sulfur and hot springs and so on. And the Banff Centre itself acknowledges the power of the land. It's not merely a landscape, an environment or ecosystem, but it's a living entity, and we ourselves live within it, and it lives within us. This inevitability has an effective impact on our day-to-day lived experience, whether we are cognizant of its affect or not. And my paper today is about a specific work by a Canadian artist, Susan Stewart, who lives in Vancouver, BC. The work is a 2-channel video installation titled Pilgrimage, Baldanath Stupa, Kathmandu, Nepal, Moraine Lake, Alberta, Canada, 2019. It depicts on one screen throngs of devout pilgrims circumambulating the great Baldanath Stupa, and on the second screen are tourists clambering over and around a naturally formed rock pile at Moraine Lake, a glacial lake set among high mountain peaks about a 1-hour drive from where I live in Banff. Both video screens are straightforward, everyday, single-take, observational video document of these two sites. But the connection between these two seemingly disparate sites may not be immediately apparent. On the one hand, Stewart documents Buddhist pilgrimage in its traditional Asian cultural form. On the other, she documents a new site of Buddhist pilgrimage in the Western world, referring to the globalization of Buddhism according to what Buddhist studies scholars describe as modern Buddhism. That is, Buddhism as a consequence of colonization, modernization, diaspora, and so forth. And by bringing these two very different sites of pilgrimage together simultaneously through a single installation, Stewart requires us to consider Buddhism as a dynamic, living religion with contemporary relevance and cultural impact in North America and beyond, and to rethink the historicization and orientalization of the category of Buddhist art as an area-specific and geographically bound field of practice and cultural expression. The work asks us to consider the larger meaning of pilgrimage in a globalized context, documenting new geographies of transmission and practice, and demonstrating how Buddhism is growing as a religion by way of an ongoing and dynamic process of East-West cultural exchange. And working with a visual strategy of juxtaposition and correspondence, Stewart's video draws an analogy between these two very different sites. Elsewhere, I have written about Buddhism as a methodology of art practice, where for many artists the spiritual inquiry drives the artistic work. And this is certainly the case for Stewart, where the intention of the work is as an expression of devotion as much as it is a prompt for practice. This work is not intended to serve a ritual or merit-making function. The work is diaristic, and it's a personal exploration of and an offering of universal compassion. The Badrinath Stupa is an important center of Tibetan Buddhist knowledge and practice, in particular for practitioners of the Nyingma school and practitioners of Stewart's lineage. Stewart practices and teaches with the Nalanda Bodhi group, headed by Ponlop Rinpoche, who have a deep connection with this site. Historical references date the earliest structure of this stupa to the 5th century of the Common Era. It was expanded to its current size in the 15th century and is now one of the largest spherical stupas in the world. Since 1979, it's been listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, attracting millions of pilgrims and visitors each year. The stupa itself is profoundly meaningful. Etymologically, the word stupa means heap, and it refers to a burial mound. In Buddhism, it refers to a mound in which the relics of a Buddha or great master are interned. The Badrinath Stupa contains the interred fragments of the bones of both the Kassapa Buddha, or the Buddha of the previous aeon, as well as the relics of the Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha of our current historical era. And the stupa is located on an important historical trade route between Tibet and India. And this stupa is associated with the birth of Tibetan Buddhism in the 8th century, as taught by the Guru Rinpoche Padmasambhava. Symbolically, the form of the stupa refers to the cosmic mountain, Mount Meru, considered as the metaphysical center of the cosmos. Moreover, the form of the stupa draws an analogy between the anthropomorphic body, the mind, and the elements of the cosmos, namely earth, fire, water, wind, and ether. In other words, the stupa signifies the interrelation of the human and the cosmos, where one is produced as an analogue of the other and interdependent. Moreover, this stupa is regarded as the embodiment of the awakened mind of all of the Buddhas. It is therefore not just historically and culturally important, but is spiritually and experientially powerful. This power is further magnified by the thousands of pilgrims circumambulating the stupa each day, each bringing their own Buddha nature to the site. Stewart's video depicts the dynamic and enthralling ritual of practitioners circumambulating the stupa, where the motion and sound of this practice appears as a social sculpture, with practitioners undertaking this pilgrimage for the benefit of all sentient beings. The second channel of Stewart's video installation depicts visitors clambering over the rock pile at Moraine Lake in the Canadian Rocky Mountains. This site is famous, if not iconic, in Canada for having been featured on the Canadian $20 bill, and as a favorite subject of numerous 19th century painters, making it a site that resonates with concepts of Canadian national identity. The natural rock pile, which scientists have determined was created by a rock slide on the northern end of the glacier-fed lake, is by definition a stupa, that is, a heap, a cairn, a rock pile. As a natural stupa within a national park, it is devoid of any cultural markers that might signify it as a spiritual site. But by positioning documentation of Moraine Lake alongside documentation of Badrinath Stupa, Stewart alerts us to the correspondence. The spiritual potential of Moraine Lake for Buddhist practitioners was identified by Khenpo Sultram Gyamtso Rinpoche in 1998. One of the foremost contemporary teachers of the Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, Khenpo Rinpoche is regarded as a great tantric master, a significant modern scholar, practitioner, and teacher. On his visit to the Rocky Mountains, Khenpo Rinpoche spontaneously perceived and identified 3 sites of special significance. Sulphur Mountain, which was the first image I showed you from my office window, the Columbia Glacier, and Moraine Lake. The spiritual significance of these sites relates to Khenpo Rinpoche's pure perception and realization of these sites as sites of revelation and manifestation, that is, as emanation aspects of the awakened mind, and therefore as sites of esoteric power. Their significance relates to their energetic potential, and these are not sites that are historically associated with Buddhism, but their significance is as new sites of pilgrimage for Buddhists relates to this confirmation of their spiritual power. Accordingly, the Nalanda Buddhist Thangka, with whom Stewart studies and practices, have established a retreat center nearby in a village at the outskirts of the national park. Although all of the sites that Khenpo Rinpoche named are highly touristed, Moraine Lake is arguably the most accessible. Khenpo Rinpoche perceived Moraine Lake as resembling a mandala associated with the tantric deity Hevajra. In the spring and summer, the action of the sun, water, wind, and rock act on the body and mind to produce a very powerful experience with transformative potential for the initiated practitioner. Accordingly, it is a site that members of Stewart's Sangha travel to undertake the Mahamudra meditation. Mahamudra practice involves focusing on the nature of the mind and its relationship to the energy of the cosmos. The charged elemental power of Moraine Lake makes it a site that is conducive to this practice. In a recent conversation, Stewart proposed 3 levels of meaning of pilgrimage in the Vajrayana context. On the outer level, pilgrimage is a sacred journey according to a predetermined path, with a history, with markers, with reference points, with community, and so on. On an inner level, pilgrimage denotes an aspirational or motivational journey, whether it be a demonstration of faith, of devotion, of merit-making, purification, towards a deeper spiritual attainment or towards a transformative practice. Typically, we will not know what that attainment or realization will be until we've undertaken the journey. But pilgrimage is the process that gets us there as a means to develop an inner awareness or conscience. In Vajrayana, the innermost or esoteric level of pilgrimage is non-dual and directed towards the realization of dependent origination and phenomenal emptiness. And these are the key teachings of Buddhism. It is a practice to gain both inner awareness and insight into these core Buddhist teachings. Buddhism teaches that everything that exists is conditioned and shaped by innumerable interdependent factors, creating a web of interconnections. The metaphor of Indra's net is used to illustrate the magnificence and glittering intricacy of this concept. So at this level of practice, pilgrimage is to gain a glimpse of this knowledge. In other words, to gain insight into ultimate reality. And the Avatamsaka Sutra is the key exposition of this idea, and it states, they, the Buddhas, know all phenomena come from interdependent origination. They know all world systems exhaustively. They know all the different phenomena in all worlds interrelated in Indra's net. Stewart's installation is an inquiry into these functions of pilgrimage and into the possibility that it provides to gain an insight into this truth of interdependence. Hence, the meaning and practice of the stupa and the meaning and practice of pilgrimage is not simply as a sacred journey towards a historic and symbolic site, but as a practice of the land and of the cosmos, of realizing the profound relationality between the human, the land, and the elemental forces of the cosmos, as a spatial practice of profound humility and compassion. Recall that when Shakyamuni Buddha, the Buddha of our current historical era, attained awakening, he called the earth to witness and affirm his triumph over the distractions of the material world. The earth, the land, is therefore a practitioner's grounding, resolve, and ultimate witness. The implication is that of the covalence of the earth and with the awakened mind.